Good evening and welcome to a very special interview show of the Prode. Today we will be discussing an ongoing issue that has captured global attention, the conflict in West Asia and the deep humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza. This complex situation has its roots in decades of tension and violence affecting millions of lives in the region. As we explore the root causes, the impact on civilians, and the potential pathways towards peace, it's crucial to look at both the broader geopolitical landscape and the on ground realities faced by those caught in the conflict. To help us unpack these issues, we are privileged to have with us Professor Muhannad Ayyash, the Professor of Sociology at the Mount Royal University, Canada. His expertise in global conflicts, power dynamics, and humanitarian challenges will guide us throughout this important conversation. Thank you so much, sir, for your time and a very warm welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Sir, to begin with, could you please provide a brief overview of the historical background of the conflict, particularly the one involving Israel and Palestine? How has the nature of the conflict evolved over the years from its inception to the current state of affairs?
No, absolutely. And that is the critical point that is often concealed in Western discourse around the issue. People don't want to talk about the root causes, the real root causes, precisely because they're not in the interests of the Israeli state and its allies. But reality is reality. So I only know how to talk about what actually happened as opposed to, dance around that to make sure that groups are not offended and all the rest of it. The core of the issue is the expulsion of the Palestinian people from their land. So that's the whole issue. It's not a religious conflict. It's not a cultural conflict. It's not dispute over territory. It's the Israeli state is established in 1948 as a result of the expulsion of approximately 55% of the Palestinian population at the time. The Zionist movement is one that emerges in the heart of Europe at the late parts of the 1800s, and it tries to address the question of European anti-Semitism, which was brutal even before the Holocaust. Of course, it culminated in that horrendous massacre and genocide of European Jews, among other people as well. But it was horrific and brutal before that as well. And the Zionist movement emerges as an answer to the question of European anti-Semitism. The problem with the answer that they came up with was that they decided to build a Jewish state outside of Europe to house all these European Jewish populations. And the land that they chose to build this state on was already inhabited by Palestinians who have called it home for thousands of years. That's the whole root cause of the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis. The Zionist movement decided to bring this massive movement of people from Europe initially, later on from other parts of the Arab world, into the land of historic Palestine. And in 1948, they colonized 78% of the land of historic Palestine and called it Israel. Like I said, that led to the expulsion of approximately 55% of the Palestinian population who became refugees in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Jordan, in Lebanon, in other parts of the world. So today, when people look at Gaza, for example, people have to be reminded that that is just 1% of historic Palestine. The Palestinian people had nothing to do with European anti-Semitism. Why are they being made to pay the price for European crimes and be restricted to live on 1% of their land? The overwhelming majority of the Palestinian population in Gaza are the descendants of the refugees from 1948. The rest of the Palestinians were either became second-class citizens within Israel, constituting a minority in what became Israel in 1948, and other Palestinians lived in the West Bank. A good portion of those were also descendants of refugees from 1948, and the West Bank is approximately 21% of historic Palestine. Now, since 1967, Israel has occupied that remaining land. The Israeli state project never was satisfied with just 78% of Palestine. It wanted 100% of Palestine. So they then, in 1967, occupied the remaining lands of Palestine and forced the Palestinian population there to live under occupation and that Palestinian population is still living under occupation, including the besieged population in Gaza. And that's where we are still today, is that Israel is determined to establish greater Israel in all the land of Palestine, expel the Palestinian population from their land, and only allow a minority of Palestinians to remain in the long run, and perhaps give Palestinian communities in about 5 to 8% of the land of historic Palestine to have some degree of self-administration, not sovereignty, not a state, but self-administration. So that's the core root of the problem. Now, of course, religion becomes weaponized over time in this story, but the core problem has always been and still is today a settler colonial problem where indigenous Palestinian populations are being expelled from their homes and lands.
Yeah. Now coming to the current situation. So, what, according to you, what are your thoughts on the primary causes behind this sustained conflict? Is it more about political issues, or like it's deeply rooted into religious or ideological differences, or perhaps a combination of all of these factors?
So it is still a political conflict, like I said, in its foundation and its continuation today. So obviously, over the decades, Palestinians have just seen their lands shrink. You know, everybody has seen those maps now of what historic Palestine looked like prior to Zionism, and then how it slowly shrunk today. It's becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. So, of course, the Palestinian people have resisted from the beginning their elimination from their lands. There's no group of people around the world that take kindly to foreign invaders coming in and saying, "This is my land now, you have to go." Nobody takes kindly to that. Palestinians have resisted that. They resisted that through both armed struggle and unarmed struggle. By the way, the overwhelming majority of the Palestinian history of resistance is unarmed struggle. Boycotts, general strikes, protests, demonstrations, and so on. Legal advocacy, political advocacy, you know, all that kind of thing. But unfortunately for the Palestinian people, they've not seen their lives improved. They are, in fact, farther removed from reaching their aspirations for freedom and sovereignty than they ever have been. And of course, it is this pressure cooker of violence and state violence and genocide committed against the Palestinian people that led to the armed operation on October 7th. And then the Israeli state uses that as a pretext to take this historical moment to realize its dream of greater Israel. And so it is always political. The Israeli state does not want to share the land with the Palestinians. This is the fundamental conflict between the groups. Israel does not want to share the land with the Palestinians, and it wants them gone. So Palestinians obviously are going to resist this because it is their lands. Why would they leave? Now, of course, myself and many Palestinians propose a sharing of the land and a sharing of sovereignty in some form or another. But the Israeli state does not want that, and it views that it has all the political and military and economic power to achieve its goals of establishing exclusive Israeli Jewish sovereignty over the entirety of the land, and defeat the Palestinians once and for all, and expel them from their land, and eliminate all forms of resistance to the Israeli settler colonial project. So this is the fundamental feature of the ongoing regional escalation. Because what is happening regionally, basically, it's not Muslim groups wanting to fight against Jewish groups based on the basis of religion. It is basically a political conflict that has now also weaponized religion in its ideologies and its mobilizations. But it's not in its nature a religious conflict, because one cannot also forget that Palestinian Christians suffer from Israeli genocide just as much as Palestinian Muslims do. So it's not a war on Islam or an attack on Islam, it's an attack on Palestinians, whether they be Christians or Muslims or whatever other religion they are. And Palestinians resist Israel not because of its Jewish, it is the quote unquote Jewish state. If I've said this example before, and it has historical examples as well, of it happening in Palestine. If Egyptian Muslims decided to colonize Palestine and kick Palestinians out and replace them with Egyptian Muslims, you'd see the exact same resistance to that. We know that, for example, when the Ottoman Empire ruled that land, anytime they overstepped and centralized their authority more than the Palestinian population was comfortable with, they revolted against the Ottoman authorities, even though they were Muslim. So Palestinians are sovereign people who don't want to be ruled by others. The Ottoman Empire kept a kind of a decentralized form of empire for the majority of its existence in Palestine. But this is nothing like that. This is settler colonialism that is trying to expel the Palestinians from their land. So they're going to continue to resist it. Now, other groups in the region have, of course, they listen to the Palestinian story in accordance with its own reality and with the reality that they observe on the ground. Everything that I'm describing is not considered controversial among Arab nations. It's only considered controversial in the West because the West is the enabler of the Israeli settler colonial project and is actively participating in it. But the point that I'm making here is that once you understand that reality, you're of course appalled by it. There's no justification for doing to what Israel is doing to the Palestinians is unjustifiable. So over the long history of the issue, so. There's a lot of support for the Palestinian cause in the Arab world, and of course that led eventually to the rise of well, there was state support in the beginning, and then that dwindles after their defeats in the wars of 48 and 67. But then you have more sort of ground up support, and you have militias stepping in where Arab states used to try to step in anyway. And militias formed like Hezbollah, like the Houthis, that want to stop Israeli settler colonialism. But of course, they don't have the military capacity to do that. But Israel at this point is trying to eliminate all groups that continue to challenge its settler colonial project, and they view Iran as the sort of head of those groups and the country that enables resistance to Israeli settler colonialism. And that's why they are attacking all of these groups and countries. You know, they're bombing Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Iran. So either them or the US are doing something in all those countries. So, you know, this is where we stand today. This whole geopolitical escalation stems from the root cause of the issue, which is the expulsion of the Palestinian people from their land.
Yeah, so you talked about Iran. So how do you see the recent developments with regards to Israel and Iran, you know?
Yeah, so you know, Israel has had this desire to get rid of the Iranian regime for decades. Even during 2003, when they encouraged the Americans, who didn't need that much encouragement because they wanted to do it themselves, to invade Iraq, Israeli officials and policymakers and think tanks and you name it were pushing for a similar war and regime change in Iran. So they've been wanting this for quite some time because they see Iran as a state that has refused to submit to the reality of Israeli settler colonialism, does not accept the idea that the Palestinians should not have the right of return, for example, or the right to establish sovereignty and their own state on their lands and so on. So Israel views Iran as a threat precisely because it refuses to bow down to its settler colonial project. And that's the source of the conflict between them. Iran, of course, rightly sees Israel as an extension of American power, as a base for the expansion of American power and influence in the region. Iran, among many people in the region, does not want to be controlled or overpowered by an imperial force from the West. So they view Israel as a critical part of the American imperial infrastructure in the region. And that's why there's so much hostility from the Americans and the West in general and Israel towards Iran and vice versa. And really, the only true solution to any of what we're talking about is less Western imperialism in the region, if not its complete movement out of the region. This does not mean, by the way, that there's no trade relations that will ever happen between Western countries and countries in the region, but we're talking about establishing new types of relationships, including trade, on the basis of equality and a reciprocal relationship that at least tries to do a win-win situation, as opposed to an imperial relationship, which is benefiting the imperial power at the expense of the majority of the people in the region. This is the situation that we're in right now. But unfortunately, it looks like neither the Americans nor the Israelis are ready to have that kind of conversation, and it looks like the Israelis are pushing for war, a regional war that they would like the Americans to come into and help them defeat the Iranian regime, because on their own, they're probably not capable of bringing it all down. And it looks like we might be heading towards that. Nobody can predict the future, but that looks like what we are heading towards at the moment.
Yeah, now coming to Gaza, the region has been severely affected by the conflict with reports of growing humanitarian crisis. So, from your perspective, what are the most pressing challenges that the people of Gaza are facing right now?
Well, the genocide hasn't stopped. Just yesterday, 80 people were killed. So I mean, I don't even know where to begin. It's an ongoing genocide, as the South Africa case makes very clear, and as many people around the world, except for people in Western countries, have agreed to. Even people in forget the governments, even people in Western countries already agree to that conclusion. But most governments around the world already agree that what is happening is a genocide. Obviously the most pressing issue is to stop it immediately. But as we're speaking right now, for a year now, Israel has basically been bombing the population indiscriminately, killing over 42,000 people, maiming and wounding over 100,000 people. Some of those are severe, life-altering injuries. Estimates are about 25% of those who are wounded with those severe injuries are not likely to survive for very long. The destruction of all health facilities and the deterioration of the remaining hospitals that are still operating, the destruction of practically all the universities, the majority, if not all, the schools. The majority of residential buildings are destroyed. There's lack of food and clean water. Sanitation is a huge issue. There's a spread of disease is a huge problem. Basically, as we are talking, Israel is still turning Gaza into an uninhabitable piece of land in order to drive all the Palestinians off that land, and then they can colonize it. That is their goal. They have not removed themselves from that path. They're still on that goal. So what the people of Gaza need is a political solution that then can open the floodgates for humanitarian aid. Because this is not just a humanitarian situation, it's a political catastrophe that needs a political solution that, again, opens up the floodgates for, we need enormous humanitarian aid on all fronts. But to do that, you need to immediately stop the genocide, and that still has not happened.
So, like in terms of global response, how would you evaluate the international community's effort in, addressing the crisis in Gaza? Do you believe the interventions and aid initiatives have been sufficient, or there are areas where the global community could add more?
It's obviously insufficient when the genocide is ongoing. So that's where the buck stops. So of course, the answer to that will be there's various levels of answering it. Of course, some countries have carried their fair share of weight. They've used a lot of their political capital or economic capital to try to end the genocide. Other countries are not just not doing anything, they're actually enabling the genocide, like the United States, like Germany, like the United Kingdom, like Canada. these spaces are actually enabling the continuation of the genocide. And then you have many states that are trying to do something, but are limited in their capacities and their abilities. And then there are far too many states that are just staying neutral because of their fear of an American punishment if they do something that oversteps the desires or that goes against the desires and goals of the US and its allies. So, but the final analysis is the genocide continues, the world has failed. The world has failed. All the murdered kids in Gaza. The world is failing all the starving people in Gaza right now. All the people that are about to be killed because nothing is stopping. The people that are still alive with us today that are surely going to be killed tomorrow or the day after or the day after that or the week after or next month. Basically, Gaza has been left to die on its own, and the world is just sitting by watching. And that should be the largest point of shame for everyone involved, even for those who are trying their best. I think we should all, including myself, we should be ashamed of what we are seeing happen and not stopping, despite our best efforts for those who are trying to stop it.
So human rights organizations have, raised significant concerns regarding the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the military actions involved in the conflict. So how do you view the human rights dimension in the whole crisis, and what do you think the international community can do to uphold human rights situation in such a volatile region?
There's only one thing you can do that makes your action significant and allows you to claim the mantle of human rights and international law, and that is put economic and political pressure on Israel. This is the only way to stop a genocidal state. They are not inhibited in their actions by anything. It's clear. You don't commit this kind of mass killing unless you go, I can get away with it. There's nothing inhibiting me from doing this. I'm just going to do whatever I need to do to achieve my goal. And I don't care how many civilians I kill, how many lives I make miserable. We're talking about millions of people here that are being massacred and whose lives are being they're suffering pain and hardship every single day for a year and will continue for years to come. Millions. We got 1 million displaced in Lebanon, hundreds killed in Lebanon. You've got 2.3 million people in Gaza. Practically all of them have been displaced. There's not one of those people have been untouched by this brutal attack. So the state is completely uninhibited, unhinged. So there's only two ways to stop a state when it's like that. You either go to war with it, or you put economic and political pressure on it to basically say there are consequences to what you're doing. And if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to suffer those consequences. I push for the economic pressure angle. The war angle, it'll just produce more hell for everybody. And nobody can predict where it's going to go. But there is an actually effective and solution that could be enacted today. And that is economic isolation of the Israeli state. If enough states and institutions around the world say we are going to boycott Israel until Palestinians are free of this genocidal machine, then Israel will stop immediately. That pressure will be felt so strongly by Israelis, they'll force their own government to stop. But right now, they're looking at the world and going, you're letting me get away with this. Why would I stop? That's their mindset. That is, it's actually also rational thinking. It's logical thinking. You can't say that it isn't. It's obviously brutal and violent and beyond reprehensible, but it is logical thinking for them to go, well, if there's no consequences, I'm going to get what I want. So you have to raise the price. So human rights organizations, United Nations agencies, United Nations institutions, states, institutions within states, they all have to be pushing for economic boycott of Israel. Otherwise, they're engaging in empty rhetoric.
I would like to conclude the discussion by asking that, what steps do you believe are essential for moving towards a peaceful resolution of the conflict, considering the regional factors as well as neighboring countries involved?
Yes, I've been saying this for quite some time. we've been on the road of genocide and war for a long time. I wrote an opinion piece for Al Jazeera in 2021 saying that something like this is inevitable. Of course, I didn't know. I didn't try to predict the exact details. Nobody can. But I made it very clear. Israel, the level of dehumanization of Palestinians within Israel is extremely high. They pay no consequences for their colonization of the West Bank, their besiegement of Gaza, their annexation of lands in the West Bank. This is only going to lead to mass events of violence, like the ones we're seeing now, like the genocidal operation, and eventually a regional war, because people are not going to just take genocide and go, oh, I accept this as reality. People in the region are really fed up with this. And things can easily escalate into a major war that will have unpredictable consequences. And by the way, I still don't do the prediction game in terms of telling you exactly how that's going to play out. A regional war might not happen this year even. It might not happen next year. It might happen in 5 to 10 years. But we're still on that road. It doesn't matter, right? Like war and violence they operate on long continuums of time that we can't really always fathom. But rest assured, whenever that regional war happened, it will be a response to this genocidal operation. So we either stay on this path or we try something new. And to try something new, you have to pressure Israel. Israel feels like it has no restraints. You've got to put restraints on them to get them to the negotiating table and actually want to compromise with Palestinians and with people in the region. There is a way to establish, like I said, shared sovereignty, a shared state, a sharing of the land. It can be for Palestinians and Israelis to live both freely and securely. It's possible. The two-state solution is dead. You can do it under a one-state solution, which can have varied models, either a confederal state, different types of constitutions. Scholars have done all this work. It's not like we have to start from scratch. So there are various models through which we can work through a better form of existence. To get there, you have to put pressure on Israel. Otherwise, it will continue to use the only tool it has ever used, which is violence. And to do that, you've got to isolate it economically. If you isolate Israel economically, they will be forced to change. And once they do, then we can have real negotiations, real settlements, real peace, real justice.
Thank you so much, Professor Ayyash, for sharing your valuable insights today. We hope today's discussion has shed light on the humanitarian challenges and the possible steps towards a peaceful solution. Thank you once again for your time, and thanks to our viewers for tuning in. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.